Hey guys, tonight we step into a crowded hallway. Someone bumps into you without saying sorry. A coworker makes a snide comment about your idea. Your partner sighs a little too loudly. Your friend forgets your birthday again. You stand there, pulse quickening, jaw tightening, breath shortening. The emotional temperature rises, even if you're silent. And yet, something strange happens. You don't bite back, you don't spiral, you just blink and feel nothing. You don't wince, you don't stew, you don't even need to pretend to be above it all. You actually are. And that, dear listener, is the quiet power we're exploring tonight. Not the illusion of control or a fake spiritual bypass, but a real internal rewiring that makes other people's nonsense pass through you like smoke through an open window. But of course, you probably won't survive this, because to reach that kind of peace, you'll need to give up a lot. Your need to be right, to be understood, to be validated by people who don't even like themselves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're joining me from somewhere cozy, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this little tribe stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking through the ruins of your old emotional life, slowly, deliberately, like you're tiptoeing around shards of broken glass. But this time, you're not barefoot. You're armored in something invisible, self-possession. You used to be so reactive. Someone could snap at you and it would ruin your entire afternoon. The wrong tone in a text message could spiral into days of inner monologue. But now you're different. Or maybe, more accurately, you're becoming different. It's not that the world stopped being annoying. If anything, it got worse. But you've built something in yourself that makes you immune to it. The ancients used to say that true strength is the ability to hold yourself still while the winds of chaos swirl around you. And right now, those winds are fierce. Maybe it's your loud neighbor. Maybe it's that coworker who insists on correcting you in meetings. Maybe it's your partner chewing too loudly at dinner. And yet you don't snap. Why? Because you're starting to realize that your reaction is often more damaging than the offense itself. A 2018 study from Stanford showed that the average physiological anger response, heart rate, cortisol spike, skin conductivity, lasts only 90 seconds, unless you feed it with your thoughts. You were feeding it for hours, days. You turned a 90-second surge into a week-long existential crisis. It's like having a mosquito bite and choosing to stab it with a fork because scratching isn't dramatic enough. But now, you're doing something radical. You're letting the itch fade. This isn't about becoming passive or weak, quite the opposite. You're not ignoring what bothers you, you're observing it, like a surgeon watching a tumor form on a scan. You don't need to scream at the tumor to make it go away, you just need to know what it is and where it came from. Half the people who bother you, they're not even trying to, they're just being themselves. Loud, oblivious, self-centered, inconsiderate, yes, but not malicious. They're like walking fire alarms that don't realize they're shrieking. You yelling at them doesn't make them stop. It just adds more noise to your own system. Here's a quirky tidbit you'll like. In medieval times, people believed anger came from an imbalance in bile, literally too much yellow bile in your body. You weren't rude, you were choleric. Imagine that. Because what you're discovering now isn't about suppressing your feelings. It's about recognizing that most of your anger is a signal, not a command. Like a check engine light, not an instruction to crash the car. So the next time someone says something that makes your neck stiffen or your teeth clench, you take one extra breath. Not because you're trying to be a saint, but because you realize you have power. Not over them, but over the only thing that actually matters, your response. Some psychologists still argue whether anger is always a secondary emotion, something that masks deeper fear, shame, or hurt. But in your case, it doesn't even matter anymore. You're not busy psychoanalyzing every trigger. You're just not gripping them like a live wire anymore. You're walking around with open hands now. And while the world might still be full of firecrackers and pricks and subtle jabs, you no longer rush to pick them up. Instead, you tilt your head, half smile, and ask yourself quietly, is this worth my nervous system? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. You're standing in front of a closed door, but the knob is familiar. It's the one labeled anger. You've opened it 1,000 times before, and each time you've walked into the same cramped, flickering room, heart pounding, mind racing, mouth saying things that feel like they belong to someone else. But tonight, you hesitate, you hover, and finally you walk away. Because something in you is beginning to understand, anger rarely begins where it appears to. It's like smoke. What you see is never where the fire started. You feel the sting of someone cutting you off in traffic, but that sting is just the match tip. The flame, that started years ago, in a home where you weren't heard, in a classroom where you were laughed at, in a relationship where your needs came last. Most people live in emotional amnesia. They forget that every time they erupt at someone, it's not just about the moment, it's about every other moment they never processed. Every slight they swallowed, every humiliation that turned into resentment, and every unmet expectation dressed up as righteousness. You're starting to remember, not in a way that makes you dwell, but in a way that makes you see clearly. There's a term in psychology called emotional displacement. It's the reason a man who's furious at his boss goes home and yells at his kids. It's the reason a woman who feels invisible in her marriage snaps at the cashier for not bagging her groceries fast enough. The target is never the real source. And when you begin to grasp this, you stop seeing the people who annoy you as enemies and start seeing them as messengers, not kind ones, but accurate. Quirky tidbit, ancient Romans believed in 2 types of anger, ira, which was explosive and impulsive, and odium, which was cold, calculating hatred. You're trying to live in neither. You're aiming for nequitia, the absence of need to retaliate at all. When your friend forgets your birthday, when your sibling mocks your career, when a stranger laughs at your accent, you no longer respond from the shallow surface. You sink deeper, not into depression, but into depth. You start asking, what exactly am I reacting to here? Often it's not what they did, it's what it reminds you of. It reminds you of that time your mother walked past your tears like they were wallpaper, or when your father only spoke when he was correcting you. It reminds you that you felt unworthy or unseen or humiliated. That's the wound, the present moment. That's just someone brushing past the scab. Oh, how do you stop reacting? Not by trying harder, not by gritting your teeth and swallowing your frustration like it's a bitter vitamin. No, you stop reacting by understanding that reactions aren't choices until they're named. And that's what you're doing now. Naming, noticing, sitting with the discomfort like it's a guest in your home, not an intruder. You ask it questions. You let it speak. You don't give it the steering wheel, but you offer it a seatbelt in the back. And funny enough, it stops screaming. There's an open debate among trauma theorists about whether unresolved emotional injuries ever fully heal or simply get better managed. But for you, the management is the healing. You're no longer being yanked like a marionette by every unkind word or passive-aggressive tone. You remember that time someone told you to relax when you were already fuming? That phrase used to detonate something in you. Now it just lands flat, like a pebble tossed into a lake that no longer ripples for every splash. You're building a kind of internal stillness that startles people. They expect you to rise, to defend, to attack, to explain. And instead you blink once, tilt your head slightly, and reply with, noted. Not as a weapon, but as a way of saying, I see what's happening here and I don't need to dance with it. It confuses people. It frees you. You're starting to become that unsettling kind of calm that people can't quite shake. Not because you're cold, but because you've stopped borrowing your sense of worth from how others treat you. Imagine that. A life where your peace isn't rented out to every rude barista or grumpy relative. A nervous system that no longer spikes for every misstep, because it knows, truly knows, that the only voice that matters is the one you're cultivating inside. The one that says, we're okay, let them be who they are, you don't need to pick up every rope that's thrown. And so you don't. You're at the bus stop, watching someone argue on the phone. They're loud, dramatic, gesturing wildly like they're auditioning for a soap opera. A few months ago, this would have irritated you instantly. You would have rolled your eyes, gritted your teeth, silently cursed them for invading your peace. But now, you feel nothing, maybe even a flicker of compassion, because you finally understand Schopenhauer's trick: expect nothing and be disturbed by nothing. You used to walk around with an emotional wish list. People should be respectful, they should mind their tone, they should use their turn signals, they should remember your birthday, they should say thank you. But Schopenhauer would laugh gently at your list. Because according to him, the root of misery isn't in how the world treats you, it's in how much you think it should treat you better. Expectation is a leash, and you've started to chew through yours. It's unsettling at first, like you're unplugging from a system that's been feeding you frustration since childhood. Every should is an invisible contract you wrote with the universe, but forgot to get it signed. People should listen when I speak. Really? Who agreed to that? My partner should support my dreams. Should they? Did they sign a legally binding scroll somewhere? Once you stop expecting others to behave a certain way, their behavior no longer feels like a betrayal. It just feels expected, which is oddly liberating. You begin to walk through life like a person in a foreign country, curious, open, and no longer offended that the customs are different. Someone cuts you off in traffic, you nod. Someone interrupts your story to talk about themselves, you shrug. Your boss overlooks your effort again, you exhale, because you weren't banking on any of them acting differently. Here's a quirky historical fact for you. In ancient Buddhist monasteries, novice monks were trained to meditate in graveyards, not to terrify them, but to help them detach from illusion. From the idea that life should be neat, polite, or fair, corpses don't apologize, they don't honor social contracts, and that's the point. Peace doesn't come from control, it comes from surrender. That doesn't mean becoming numb or passive, it means becoming wise. Psychologists call it cognitive diffusion, the practice of stepping back from your thoughts instead of fusing with them. You see your anger not as you, but as something passing through you. A weather pattern, not a character flaw. It rains inside you, then it passes. No shame, no story, just space. Now, there's still debate in therapeutic circles about whether letting go of expectations entirely is healthy, or if some standards are necessary for boundaries and self-respect. But you're learning to differentiate. You keep boundaries. You drop expectations. One is about how you act. The other is about trying to script the world. And frankly, the world's a terrible actor. So now you wake up expecting nothing. Not in a cynical, defeated way, but in a way that feels strangely light. You don't expect your spouse to read your mind. You don't expect strangers to be kind. You don't expect old friends to understand your growth. And so when kindness comes, it feels like a gift, not a debt repaid. And so when kindness comes, it feels like a gift, not a debt repaid. Even in relationships, you stop carrying a tally sheet. You stop measuring affection in units of obligation. You stop bracing for disappointment. Because you realize that when you release the world from your grip, it stops bruising your hand. This makes you confusing to people. They're used to reaction, to drama, to expectation wrapped in entitlement. But you no longer play. You let others be selfish, loud, thoughtless, and you sit across from them like a mountain, still, silent, unmoved. You once mistook this for coldness, but it's not. It's warmth with boundaries, compassion without codependence, love without conditions. A man once wrote to Schopenhauer saying he found his philosophy too depressing. Schopenhauer responded, "Depressing? No, only liberating." And you finally get it. You're not building walls, you're planting trees. You're not silencing your emotions, you're giving them better acoustics. Because when you expect nothing, everything becomes enough. And suddenly, no one can take your peace. Not because they don't try, but because you never handed it to them in the first place. You're sitting across from someone who's clearly trying to provoke you. Their words are laced with sarcasm. Their eyes flick with smug satisfaction every time they jab. It used to work. You used to feel the flush of heat rise from your chest to your temples. You used to stumble over your comebacks, replaying the conversation in your head for days, crafting the perfect retort too late. But not this time. This time you smirk, not mockingly, just quietly, because now you carry a secret, Nietzsche's secret, the laughing god. He once said, "Perhaps I know best why man alone laughs. He alone suffers so deeply that he had to invent laughter." And you've started laughing. Not at people, not even with them, but at the cosmic absurdity of it all. You see, Nietzsche didn't want you to be unbothered by becoming small and hidden. He wanted you to become bigger, so big that insults bounce off you like pebbles off a cathedral. So big that your ego, once the most fragile part of you, becomes the most expendable. Because here's the truth, most anger is ego defense. It's your inner bouncer trying to protect a tiny king who thinks the world owes him reverence. And when someone disrespects you, that king throws a tantrum. But Nietzsche, he wants that king dead. He wants you to become a dancer, not a guard. He wants you to transcend offense, not dodge it. It's the difference between flinching every time someone mispronounces your name and offering them the correct pronunciation with a smile. Between needing to correct every slight and genuinely realizing, that most people aren't even thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves, their own insecurities, their own script. A quirky fact for you, Nietzsche suffered from debilitating migraines, digestive issues, and isolation most of his adult life. But instead of becoming bitter, he embraced the chaos. He said, "I am not a man, I am dynamite." He didn't mean explosive in rage, he meant untouchable by pettiness. That's your path now. You've started seeing anger as proof of misalignment. If someone can push your buttons that easily, maybe you need to change the wiring. Because why are there so many buttons in the first place? Psychologists still argue whether ego death is possible outside of psychedelics and mystic states, but you've tasted a small version of it here. A temporary silence in the part of your brain that used to scream, "Defend yourself." And in that silence, you laugh. Because the truth is, most provocations are pitiful. The passive-aggressive tone, the vague tweet, the eye roll. You once saw these as assaults, now you see them as clowns. Not evil, just overcompensating for their own invisible wounds. It's hard to take someone seriously when you realize their behavior is just a desperate attempt to feel significant. And when you stop needing to be significant in their eyes, you're free. Imagine someone trying to shame a river, calling it lazy, dirty, crooked. The river doesn't stop, doesn't explain, doesn't redirect, it just keeps flowing. That's you now. And that unnerves people who want you to drown with them in shallow pools. Let them call you names. Let them misunderstand your calm. Let them project their shadows. You'll just tilt your head and chuckle softly. Not because you're better, but because you're no longer trapped in the same drama. You've discovered that laughter, when born from clarity, is the ultimate deflection. Not mockery, but a shrug that says, "I see you, I forgive you, but I'm not playing." You're becoming what Nietzsche called the Übermensch, not a superhuman who dominates others, but one who has mastered himself. Who dances through pain, who laughs at absurdity, who watches the storm and thinks, how dramatic, I used to be like that. And somewhere deep down, the part of you that used to scream for justice now whispers, let them be loud, I'm done fighting ghosts. You're sitting in a meeting, your coworker, let's call him Tunde, is doing that thing again, hijacking your ideas, repeating them with extra volume and none of the credit. A few months ago, your jaw would have tensed. Your nails would have carved crescents into your palms. You would have rehearsed the perfect email rebuttal all afternoon. But now you observe, like a strategist, like Machiavelli, not because you're weak, but because you've learned that emotions are a currency and you don't spend yours on foolish investments anymore. You don't need to clap back. You don't need to interrupt. You don't even need to glare. You just adjust your internal telescope and zoom out. You see the boardroom from the ceiling. You see Tunde's desperation. You see your manager checking their watch. You see the drama unfolding like a chess game, not a fist fight. And just like that, you've exited the emotional plane. You've stepped into what Machiavelli would call calculated detachment. In The Prince, Machiavelli doesn't tell you to be heartless. He tells you to be strategic. He believed people act in their own self-interest 90% of the time, and the sooner you understand that, the less time you waste being shocked by it. He'd say, if Tunde steals your idea, don't get angry, get smarter. Let the room applaud him, let him bask, then build quietly, document thoroughly, and speak clearly the next time. You're not aiming for a quick emotional win. You're playing the long game. There's a strange freedom in assuming people will be selfish. You stop being surprised. You stop writing moral fairy tales in your head where everyone's supposed to be kind and fair and give credit like it's candy. You accept that many people operate like survival machines, seeking advantage, not justice. This doesn't make you cynical. It makes you clear. Here's a quirky tidbit. In Renaissance Italy, where Machiavelli lived, politics wasn't just a battlefield, it was theater. Alliances were formed over wine and shattered over whispers, and if you reacted emotionally, you lost, fast, so people wore masks. Not to deceive, but to survive. That's what you've started doing too. Not lying, but concealing your inner weather. If you're frustrated, you nod. If you're insulted, you blink. If someone challenges your competence, you raise an eyebrow and ask, could you elaborate? Not passive-aggressively, just calmly, coldly, surgically. Psychologists still debate whether emotional suppression causes more harm than good. But Machiavelli would ask, are you suppressing or are you selecting? Because now you choose. You decide when to show emotion and which one. You no longer hand people the remote to your nervous system. You hold it tightly. It's the reason that woman at the family dinner keeps escalating while you sip your wine. It's the reason your ex texts 5 times in 1 hour and you reply once 4 hours later with, hope you're well. It's not a game, it's poise. Not silence from fear, but silence from command. You're becoming what Machiavelli would admire, a calm, controlled force with no need to shout. You know your power. You don't have to broadcast it. You don't need revenge, you just need time. Time reveals everything. And while others spend theirs trying to provoke, you spend yours building unshakable presence. You no longer react to the mood of the room. You set it. And when someone throws shade, you let it pass like a cloud over a mountain. After all, Machiavelli never said, don't feel. He just said, feel it later, act wisely now, and you do. You're staring at a text that triggers something ancient in you. Maybe it's short and cold. Maybe it's a paragraph that somehow says everything and nothing at all. Maybe it's a friend who disappeared without warning, only to pop back up as if nothing happened. Whatever it is, your chest tightens. Your mind starts racing. You feel the need to respond, to clarify, to lash out, or maybe to cry, but instead you sit with it. You do nothing, because you finally realize this isn't just about the text. it's about something older, deeper. Somewhere in your childhood, the roots of this reaction were planted, and they've been growing quietly ever since. This is the section where you go home, not physically, but emotionally. You return to that house where you tiptoed around moods, where silence meant danger, where love had strings attached, where praise was performance-based, where your tears made people uncomfortable. And that's where your anger really began. Modern psychologists call this attachment trauma. It's not always about outright abuse. Sometimes it's about what never happened. The hugs you didn't get. The questions no one asked. The emotions that were punished instead of welcomed. When someone ignores you, your panic isn't about them. It's about the ghost of your mother walking away while you were still mid-sentence. When someone criticizes you, your rage isn't about the comment. It's about your father's voice booming through the walls, finding fault in everything. And now that you see it, you stop blaming the present for wounds it didn't cause. This doesn't mean excusing others. It means taking your emotional life off autopilot. You're no longer letting strangers on the internet, or flaky friends or distant lovers, pull you back into childhood. You feel the emotion rise, but now you catch it. You ask, is this really about them, or is this a rerun? A quirky clinical tidbit: therapist Lindsay C. Gibson coined the term emotionally immature parents to describe adults who were physically present but emotionally absent. And guess what? A huge number of people grew up with them. That's why so many of us walk around with triggers we can't explain. Your adult self may wear suits, schedule meetings, and write polite emails, but your inner child is often the one replying to texts. And when that child feels abandoned, unseen, or rejected, the adult gets angry. You're learning to intervene. You begin to practice what attachment therapists call reparenting. You talk to yourself the way no one did. You say, it's okay they didn't reply, we're still worthy. Or they forgot, but I won't forget myself. You start keeping small promises to yourself. You make your bed, you drink water, you log off social media when it becomes a minefield. Not because you're disciplined, but because you're finally learning how to care for yourself like a steady, loving parent would. This is deep, slow work. And scholars still argue whether inner child healing is evidence-based or more of a symbolic ritual. But does it matter? If it works, it works. Because now, instead of spiraling when someone disrespects you, you pause, you breathe. You put a hand over your chest and say, I know what this feels like. I've been here before, but this time, I'm not alone. You might still get angry, but the difference is you know why, and that makes it smaller, softer, less sharp. And eventually, the silence in your chest grows louder than the noise in your mind, because when you heal the original wound, you stop expecting strangers to be surgeons. You stop demanding perfect behavior from people who weren't even taught how to love themselves. And you stop burning down your peace just to signal distress. You become your own safe place. So when someone ghosts you, mocks you, overlooks you, or misunderstands you, something inside stays steady. Not because you don't feel the sting, but because you've stopped bleeding from places you've already stitched. You're brushing your teeth when an old memory smacks you across the mind like a gust of wind through a cracked window. A friend who betrayed you, a teacher who humiliated you, a parent who said the thing that gutted your soul with surgical precision. Your jaw tightens, you almost spit the toothpaste out mid-growl, but then you remember, you're not fighting ghosts anymore. Tonight, you're meeting your shadow. Carl Jung believed that every person carries a shadow, a hidden, suppressed part of ourselves that holds all the emotions we were told were too much. The anger, the envy, the shame, the rage, the parts of you that were punished, mocked, or simply ignored. You weren't born angry, You were taught that certain feelings were dangerous, and so you locked them away. You became nice. You smiled when you wanted to scream. You comforted others while you bled. You became a people pleaser, an achiever, a perfectionist. But the shadow never disappeared. It waited. And every time you snapped, sulked, or stewed in resentment, you weren't broken. You were leaking shadow. Meeting your shadow is not a kumbaya retreat in the forest. It's ugly. It's sweaty. It's confronting the part of you that wants to scream, "Why doesn't anyone take care of me?" It's standing in front of the emotional mirror and seeing yourself not as good or bad, but as whole. Quirky tidbit: in some indigenous Australian tribes, the shadow was considered your dream self, the version of you that emerges in sleep and shows you the truths you're too afraid to face during the day. A trickster, a guide, a warning. You're beginning to listen to yours. You remember the time you were passive-aggressively dismissed in a meeting, and instead of sulking, you asked, "Why did that hurt so badly?" Not rhetorically, but seriously, you weren't just ignored. You were reminded of all the times your voice didn't matter growing up. The shadow isn't trying to sabotage you, it's trying to get your attention. Anger is its language, silence is its weapon, bitterness is its scream. But now, instead of exiling it, you're inviting it in. You say, "All right, show me," and it does. It shows you the time you swallowed your truth just to keep a friend, the night you apologized when they were the one who crossed the line, the hundreds of moments where you laughed instead of cried. You start journaling not to be productive, but to confess. You write things you're not proud of. You admit you still hold grudges. That part of you wants revenge. That part of you likes imagining confrontations where you say the perfect thing and walk away victorious. You don't judge yourself, you observe. Psychologists still argue whether full integration of the shadow is possible or whether it simply becomes better managed. But even partial integration, that's freedom. Because the less you fear your own emotions, the less power anyone else has over you. You realize now, people don't make you angry. They just trigger a part of you haven't befriended yet. And so next time someone disrespects you, your question isn't, "Why are they like this?" It's, "What are they waking up inside me?" And then you tend to that. You comfort it, you breathe through it, you do the work. Soon, anger becomes less like a firestorm and more like a weather report. You don't say, "I am angry." You say, "There is anger," and it passes. You're no longer a slave to your feelings. You're their translator, their host, their teacher. And every time you feel bothered, triggered, or flooded by emotion, you lean in and whisper, "Ah, hello, shadow. What lesson do you have tonight?" You're on the edge of an argument. You can feel it rising like heat from a stovetop, your muscles bracing, your throat preparing the perfect comeback, your face arranging itself into defensive formation. The trigger was small, maybe even laughable. Someone made a sly comment about your career, or forgot your boundaries, or dismissed your opinion like a fly on the table. You're about to jump in, but then you step back. Because now you know something most people don't. Distance is more powerful than dominance, and you've started practicing what Buddhist monks, special forces soldiers, and hostage negotiators all quietly master: psychological distance. You pause, and in that pause you stretch time. Your reaction, once instant and volcanic, is now like slow-motion footage. You examine it, you name it, and then sometimes you just let it float away. You don't say, "I'm fine." You don't say anything. You just breathe and observe. This isn't suppression, it's containment, an ancient practice of holding heat without burning everything down. Here's a quirky tidbit. In certain martial arts, masters teach students to swallow the insult, not out of cowardice but control. When someone attacks, the novice blocks or counters. The master steps aside, watches, waits. Then moves with precision, not panic. You're becoming the master now. Psychological distance is more than breathing exercises. It's about zooming out, seeing the person across from you not as a villain, but as a moment. a flicker in your long life, a 20-second scene in a 1,000-hour movie. They can't define the story unless you hand them the pen. You practice the mental technique used in acceptance and commitment therapy called diffusion. You look at your thoughts and emotions like clouds in the sky, not facts carved into stone. Someone says you always take things too personally, and your mind shouts, "That's not true." But instead of engaging, you tell yourself, "I'm having the thought that I need to defend myself." Suddenly you've moved from being inside the thought to watching it from the outside. It's disorienting at first, like looking at your own hands and realizing you can just lower them. Now, some psychologists debate whether diffusion techniques blunt emotional authenticity, but you know better. You're not numbing, you're noticing. And in that noticing, you regain agency. You stop needing to control how people treat you. You control how close you stand to them emotionally. That coworker who always critiques your work in front of others, you stop reacting, you start documenting. That friend who only calls when they need something, you don't confront, you don't ghost, you just begin replying with less urgency, less detail, less access. You don't slam doors, you just quietly close them, 1 inch at a time. Because anger isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's about proximity. And you've learned that peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you build through space. You stop hoping people will change if you explain yourself one more time. You stop pouring emotional labor into people who treat it like tap water. And the best part? They don't even notice you're retreating, because you're not dramatic, you're not making speeches, you're just gone. You've created a gap, a silence, a sacred no-contact zone in your own mind. And in that space you find clarity, you find calm, you find the version of yourself that doesn't need to win the conversation to feel whole. You're not cold, you're not bitter, you're just less available to chaos. And when the world tries to pull you back in, you smile softly and say, "I'm not coming down there anymore." You're lying in bed, phone face down, silence hanging in the air like fog. You're thinking about someone who let you down, or maybe they didn't. It just feels that way. They didn't text back, or they canceled last minute, or they laughed too hard at someone else's joke and not yours. It's small, trivial, ridiculous even, but it still stings. And yet tonight, instead of spiraling, you shrug. Not a cold, sarcastic shrug, a gentle one. The kind Albert Camus might give to the absurdity of it all. Because you're starting to understand what he meant when he said, "The absurd is the essential concept and the first truth." Most of what people say and do, it doesn't make sense, not in the way you wish it would. Not in the tidy, narratively satisfying way your emotional brain craves. You want people to explain themselves, to mean what they say, to behave consistently, to love you like you love them. But they don't. They flake, they disappoint, they contradict themselves, they ghost, they miscommunicate. They panic and self-sabotage. Sometimes they even lie, not to harm, but to protect their own illusion of control. You finally accept it. You've stopped demanding coherence from chaos. You've stopped expecting a love letter from a vending machine. You've stopped looking for justice in the group chat. Camus wrote about the myth of Sisyphus, condemned to push a boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down each time. The tragedy, Camus said, wasn't in the task. It was in the hope that the boulder would stay at the top. The liberation comes when Sisyphus accepts the absurdity and keeps pushing anyway. That's you now. You accept that people are unreliable. You stop personalizing their messiness. You stop writing subplots where everyone has depth and closure and emotional intelligence. Instead, you find quiet joy in your own steadiness. Here's a strange little fact. Some behavioral economists argue that the human brain is not wired for truth, but for pattern recognition and survival. That means people don't respond to reality. They respond to what they believe will keep them safe or liked or powerful, even if it makes no sense. You see this everywhere now. The cousin who yells about respect but never listens. The influencer who preaches peace while subtweeting enemies. The friend who says, "You're like family," but vanishes the second you need help. You could rage, you could demand answers, but now you just tilt your head and think, of course this is how it is. Not because you're numb, but because you're free. Psychologists still debate whether detachment from meaning is healthy or nihilistic, but you're not giving up on meaning, you're just creating your own. You stop asking, why are people like this? And start asking, how do I want to respond to it? You begin crafting your inner world with the same attention you once gave to decoding everyone else's behavior. You choose rituals that soothe you, music that restores you, texts you don't reply to, drama you don't analyze. You sip your coffee like it's a ceremony. You walk away from arguments like it's choreography. You let go of the need to understand everyone because you've realized understanding doesn't always equal peace. Sometimes peace is just letting the unanswered questions stay unanswered. And when someone says something offensive, or posts something vague, or implies something cruel, you don't spiral. You just raise an eyebrow and whisper Camus' mantra to yourself. In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. You smile and you sleep. You're in a crowded room. Maybe it's a dinner party, maybe a group chat, maybe a work Zoom call where people keep interrupting each other with that weird, self-important laugh. You say something meaningful, soft but sincere. No one responds. Then someone else repeats the same thought, louder, and suddenly it's genius. And yet, you don't flinch. You just sip your drink, or stare at the camera, or adjust your tone slightly, but not your worth. Because now you know hell is other people. Jean-Paul Sartre wasn't being dramatic when he said that. He was just being honest. The deepest kind of honest, the kind you can only hear when you've been ignored, dismissed, and misread enough times to finally stop caring. Sartre believed that the moment another person looks at you, you become an object, a role, a version of you that fits their biases, their wounds, their imagination. And the more you try to fight it, the more you try to control how others perceive you, the more enslaved you become. You've lived there, haven't you? In the endless loop of, what did they mean by that text? In the purgatory of, did I come across as too much or not enough? In the interrogation room of your own mind, begging the jury of public opinion to see your heart instead of your surface. But tonight, you stop showing up to the trial. You finally get that most people don't even see you. They see themselves, reflected through you. And when they judge you, they're often reacting to something you accidentally reminded them of. Their ex, their mother, their younger, more ambitious self, their guilt, their envy, their secret dreams. And you were just the mirror. A quirky little fact. A 2021 study from the University of Chicago found that people are significantly worse at reading others' emotions and intentions than they think they are. In fact, confidence in your reading is often inversely related to your accuracy. Translation: most people are confidently misjudging you every single day. And that used to infuriate you, until now. Because now you understand the ultimate emotional jujitsu move. Let them. Let them misunderstand. Let them whisper. Let them form opinions that are 90% projection and 10% static. You don't need to clarify anymore. You don't need to rush to correct their narrative. You don't need to explain your tone, your choices, your silence. Because you've left the courtroom. Psychologists still debate whether seeking external validation is hardwired or culturally conditioned. But either way, you've realized it's a losing game. Because even when you win someone's approval, you still lose your own clarity. You begin to contort yourself into 1,000 subtle shapes, each designed to earn praise that evaporates the moment someone else walks in the room. So now, when someone insults you with a smile, you don't rise. When they throw a compliment shaped like a leash, you don't bite. You let them orbit around their illusion. You return to yourself. This isn't arrogance, it's spiritual insulation. You start to treat your attention like a royal asset. You give it where it's earned, not where it's demanded. You notice how much of your past anger came from trying to change the unchangeable. Why don't they respect me? Why did they stop talking to me? Why don't they see my value? Now your only question is, why was I trying so hard to be seen by people wearing blindfolds? And so you walk through the world a little differently now. You speak less but with more weight. You smile but it's not performative. You listen but you don't absorb. You exist unapologetically without audience approval. And when people project their expectations onto you, when they want you to be softer, quieter, simpler, smaller, you give them nothing. Not anger, not resistance, just the gentle burn of not bending, because you've stopped auditioning and started living. You're watching yourself in real time, calm, composed, unmoved, while someone else escalates. Their voice is rising, their tone is biting, their words are fishing hooks, and you're still, not out of fear, not out of surrender, but because you've become the parent you never had. Welcome to emotional reparenting. It's not glamorous, there are no medals for it. No audience clapping when you hold your tongue, or regulate your breathing, or whisper, "We're safe now," to the child version of you hiding behind your adult face. But this is where your anger dissolves, not in public victories, but in private repairs. You used to seek comfort from others. You used to hope someone would finally understand, finally care, finally protect you from the chaos. But now, you've stopped outsourcing your emotional safety. You've started building it yourself. And this, ironically, is what finally allows you to stop getting triggered by everyone else. Because that flippant friend who never shows up on time, you no longer interpret it as abandonment. You just set clearer expectations. That critical boss, you no longer hear your father's voice in theirs. You just take notes, fix what's needed, and leave the rest behind at 5:01 p.m. Here's a quirky fact you'll love. In 1960s attachment theory experiments, psychologists discovered that babies didn't just cry when their mothers left the room. They cried when their sense of safety left. The absence wasn't physical, it was psychological. And now, decades later, you realize you've been chasing that same safety through approval, praise, and performance. But today, you pause. You sit quietly in your car before going into work. You say out loud, "No matter what happens in there today, I've got me." And your body believes you. Some therapists say emotional reparenting is like laying down new tracks over the rickety old ones you grew up on. Others say it's like switching roles mid-play. You become both the frightened child and the comforting adult. Either way, the work is sacred. You start catching yourself mid-flare. You pause during the fight. You step outside when the group chat gets toxic. You don't ghost people. You ghost your old responses. You make tea instead of sending that angry email. You breathe before calling them back. You delete the comment before it turns into a weapon. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to stay with yourself through discomfort. You start saying things like, "This hurts, but we'll be okay." They don't need to understand us. We understand us. We don't need to earn love through overthinking anymore. And your inner child, the one who used to scream every time someone was cold, distant, or unpredictable, she finally stopped screaming. Because she trusts you now. You're no longer angry at people for not being what you needed. You're no longer fuming at life for being unfair. You've taken the wheel. You've become the warmth you begged for. The consistency you craved, the tenderness you were punished for wanting, and it shows. People start noticing how unbothered you are, how steady, how you speak when necessary but never to prove. How you let silence win arguments, how you pick peace, not passivity. They don't know the years it took, the journal pages, the sleepless nights, the therapy bills, the spiritual peeling, the conversations with yourself in bathroom mirrors. They just see the glow, you know the fire it came from. And when someone tries to provoke you now, when they poke the old bruise expecting blood, they get nothing. Because that part of you, she's safe, she's seen, she's healed. And nothing in this noisy, messy world can take that from you now. You're walking through the middle of someone else's chaos. Maybe it's a family argument you didn't start. Maybe it's a partner's mood swing. Maybe it's your boss unloading stress like it's part of your job description. You used to get pulled in, hooked like a fish, flailing, explaining, defending, justifying, but now you stay still because you've discovered strategic indifference, what the Stoics called the ultimate armor. Marcus Aurelius would have been proud. You stand there mentally sipping tea while the emotional storm rages around you, not cold, not disconnected, just unimpressed. You've realized that not every fire deserves your water. You once believed that reacting meant caring, that if someone was upset, you had to fix it. That if someone questioned your worth, you had to prove it. That if someone insulted you, you had to restore the balance. But now you understand, your calm is the balance. The Stoics had a term for this, apatheia. It doesn't mean apathy. It means freedom from passion's control. It means feeling, but not being ruled by feeling. You're no longer the actor getting lost in the role. You're the director, watching from behind the camera, adjusting the scene only when necessary. A quirky tidbit? In ancient Rome, Stoic philosophers were often advisors to emperors. Why? Because while everyone else panicked during plagues, betrayals, and invasions, the Stoics kept a ledger of logic. They weren't easily swayed. They didn't scream at fate. They just asked, what's within my control right now? And you? You're asking that every time your phone buzzes with a rude message. Every time someone tries to bait you into emotional labor. Every time a friend's passive-aggressive comment tries to poke your wounds. You used to take it personally. Now you take it strategically. You don't respond with, how dare they? You respond with, does this require my energy? And 90% of the time, the answer is no. Psychologists now talk about emotional boundary setting as a core skill for self-regulation. But the Stoics were already practicing it centuries ago. They understood that not every opinion needed a rebuttal. Not every disrespect needed revenge. Not every invitation to conflict deserved an RSVP. You've internalized that now. Someone asks a loaded question, you answer simply without rising to the bait. Someone gossips about you, you let the silence answer. Someone storms out of the room, you don't chase. You don't panic, you let them go, because your peace isn't on the auction block anymore. You used to think that being unbothered meant being heartless. That true connection required emotional volatility. That love demanded reactivity. But now you see the opposite is true. Your stillness isn't a lack of care, it's a precision of care. You've stopped trying to win every emotional chess match. Sometimes you walk away from the board entirely. And that's what throws people off. They expect the old you, the reactive you, the one who'd text back paragraphs, who'd raise your voice to match theirs, who'd lose sleep trying to make things right with people who were committed to being wrong. But that version of you, she retired. Now you carry yourself like the emperor you were always meant to be, draped in dignity, swaddled in silence, and utterly unshaken by noise. And when someone asks, "Don't you care?" you smile gently and say, "Not enough to lose myself." You're in the middle of a conversation that's starting to turn. The temperature drops, the tone sharpens, that familiar tension creeps into your shoulders. You can feel it coming, the insult disguised as feedback. The gaslighting disguised as concern. The emotional grenade tossed casually into the middle of what should have been a peaceful chat. You used to engage, you used to react, defend, argue, clarify, beg to be understood, but not anymore. Now you've learned one of the most underestimated power moves in existence. You don't say a word. You let the silence carry the weight. Because you've come to understand that when it comes to emotional warfare, the person who speaks the least holds the most power. You used to think you had to win people over with words. Now you know that some battles are won with stillness. You've learned to stop dancing with dysfunction. When someone tries to provoke you, you don't perform. You don't do the whole back and forth. You don't raise your voice to match theirs or type long messages with trembling fingers and righteous fury. You just opt out. And the silence, it stings, not you but them. You've discovered that silence is a mirror. It reflects back whatever the other person brought to the table. If they came with kindness, the silence feels like peace. If they came with malice, the silence reveals their emptiness. There's an old saying, you never wrestle with a pig, you both get dirty and the pig likes it. You used to climb into the mud every time. Now, you stand at the fence and watch the pig roll. Quirky tidbit for your mental bookshelf. In negotiation training at the Harvard Law School program on negotiation, one of the most effective tactics taught is strategic silence. Why? Because people are deeply uncomfortable with it. Silence forces self-correction, over-explaining, even confession. The louder someone is, the more your quiet unnerves them. And you're starting to see that play out in your life. You used to respond to every subtle dig, every rude comment, every passive-aggressive remark. You'd correct the narrative, try to educate them, try to make them see your side. Now, you give them nothing, no proof, no explanation, no energy, just silence. You don't weaponize it, you honor it. Psychologists still argue whether the gray rock method, a technique where you become as emotionally non-reactive as possible around manipulative people, is sustainable in the long term. But for you, it's not about dissociation. It's about self-preservation. You're not cutting people off, you're cutting yourself loose. You let them talk, let them try to poke, prod, and provoke, let them escalate. You stay anchored, grounded. Your facial expression calm, your nervous system steady. You don't meet their chaos, you meet yourself. And the impact? It's electric. The person who always relied on your reactivity to feel powerful suddenly looks foolish, flailing. The drama lover who thrived on your emotional participation now has no script. The manipulator who used guilt to control you suddenly feels the echo of their own silence. Because you're done playing roles. You don't need to prove your intelligence in every debate. You don't need to justify your feelings to someone who doesn't care. You don't need to explain your boundaries like a defendant on trial. You are no longer in the courtroom. You are no longer in the ring. You are the sky now. And when someone starts a storm, you simply let it pass, without comment, without correction, without participation. Because peace isn't found in proving your point. It's found in remembering you don't owe anyone your reaction. You wake up to a long message. Maybe it's a guilt trip. Maybe it's a veiled insult. Maybe it's someone dredging up the past like it's your unpaid debt. You stare at it, you scroll, you read it twice, you sigh. Then you do something radical. You don't respond. Not because you're overwhelmed, not because you're unsure, but because you've finally absorbed the hardest and most liberating truth. No one owes you peace, and you don't owe anyone your disturbance. You used to believe that if you just explained yourself well enough, people would finally understand. That if you just expressed how deeply they hurt you, they'd apologize. That if you were patient, graceful, available, generous, they'd meet you there. But now, you've burned the ledger. You've stopped waiting for emotional refunds from people who never signed the contract. You walk away, not because you're angry, but because you're finally full. When you truly become responsible for your own peace, you stop fighting for it in other people's behavior. You stop expecting closure. You stop chasing clarity. You stop needing everyone to agree with your version of the story. Instead, you sit quietly in the discomfort and it passes. Researchers studying distress tolerance have found that the most resilient individuals aren't the ones who avoid pain. They're the ones who can sit with it without trying to change it. Without needing to act, to fix, to lash out, or to solve. That's you now. You used to react as a form of control. Anger was your way of wrestling the chaos into something you could touch. But now, you're starting to live without needing constant confirmation that the world is right. You've surrendered to the fact that it's not right. It's messy, unfair, beautiful, brutal, all of it, all at once. And yet you're okay, because your emotional well-being is no longer outsourced. You've revoked the authority you once gave to your partner's mood, your parents' tone, your friend's consistency, your manager's tone. You're the sole custodian of your nervous system now. Some philosophers argue that this is emotional detachment taken too far, that without shared emotional accountability, society falls apart. But you don't hear detachment in this, you hear sovereignty. You don't stop caring, you just stop bleeding. You still feel things, you still hurt. But your hurt no longer turns into fire aimed at the nearest person. Your pain no longer turns into compulsive truth-telling or frantic boundary setting. You've stopped treating every conflict like a courtroom drama where you must deliver the closing argument of your life. Instead, you say, let them think what they think. Let them do what they do. Let them go if they must. You've learned to mourn people quietly. You've learned to let go without fanfare. You've learned that not every betrayal deserves a breakdown, and not every goodbye needs a door slammed. Because you are no longer looking for villains and victims, you're looking for freedom. You don't want to win arguments, you want to win yourself back. And now that you have, you're protective, not reactive. You no longer get pulled into every battle. You're not here to debate your worth, defend your boundaries, or decode someone's emotional breadcrumb trail. You're here to protect the peace you earned with blood and years and therapy and nights crying on your own bathroom floor. So when someone brings you drama, disrespect, dishonesty, or distorted expectations, you don't respond to them. You respond to you. You whisper, "We don't have to go back into the fire to prove we've survived it," and then you walk away. You're back where it all began. The same group chat, the same family table, the same partner, the same office corridor. The triggers are still here, familiar as ever. The passive aggression, the judgment wrapped in a joke, the silence that says too much. And yet you don't flinch, because now you carry a stillness that unnerves the room. You've changed the texture of your nervous system. What used to feel like fire in your chest is now a flicker in your wrist. What used to turn into a 3-day spiral now becomes a single, quiet breath. You've become unrecognizable, not to others but to yourself, and that's the real win. You used to think power looked like dominance, like yelling louder, writing longer, making them see. But real power? It's not noise, it's neutrality. You've stopped explaining your reactions because you've stopped having them. Not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that most people speak from their wounds, not their wisdom. And you've stopped borrowing their pain. You don't rise above, you go within. You no longer brace for offense. You prepare for nothing, you simply show up, fully, calmly, unmoved. There's a strange moment that happens now. When someone tries to trigger you and it just doesn't work, they look at you expecting sparks, expecting the old dance. But you're not in costume anymore. You're not performing. You tilt your head slightly, blink, maybe even smile, and say you could be right. And the conversation ends. Here's a quirky historical footnote. In samurai culture, the highest form of discipline was not how well you could wield a sword, but how long you could keep it sheathed. Mastery was measured in patience, not precision. The greatest warrior was the one who never had to fight. That's you now. You don't enter every emotional duel. You don't chase clarity like a bloodhound. You don't teach people lessons they don't want to learn. You let people misunderstand you, mislabel you, miss out on you. Psychologists call this radical acceptance, the act of letting life be what it is, even when it's unfair, even when it hurts, even when it betrays every script you had in your head. You don't resist it, you relax into it. You used to ask, why do they treat me this way? Now you ask, why did I think they wouldn't? And it's not bitterness, it's clarity. You've stopped hoping for people to change just to make you more comfortable. You've stopped trying to edit the world like a draft in your hands. You've become the peace you kept begging everyone else to offer. And maybe the chaos never ends. Maybe the world never gets kinder. Maybe the people who hurt you never apologize. Maybe the tension never fully dissolves. But here's the truth, it doesn't have to. And now, as everything slows, you exhale. The world is still out there. The noise, the texts, the subtle insults wrapped in smiles, the misunderstandings that used to keep you up at night, they'll still be there in the morning. But you've changed. Your inner world has grown so vast, so still, that the storms outside barely register. You close your eyes and feel your shoulders soften. The tension in your jaw disappears. The thoughts that once raced like wild horses now drift like clouds. You are no longer at war with the world or with yourself. Tonight, you don't need to solve anything, or fix anyone, or write another mental script for how that conversation should have gone. You've already won because you chose peace over pride, silence over spectacle, calm over chaos. You've met your anger with compassion. You've met your triggers with wisdom. You've met your shadow and stayed. And maybe for the first time in a very long time, you feel safe inside your own skin. So as your breath evens out and your thoughts grow slower and the room around you fades into soft blur, remember this. You are not the noise. You are not the reaction. You are not the pain someone else handed you. You are the quiet. You are the breath between the words, the stillness beneath the drama, the ocean beneath the waves. Sleep now. Let your body carry this stillness into your dreams. Let your spirit rest in its own sanctuary. You are safe. You are whole. You are free.